Maury, the Federation keeps saying that the government's plan is just about saving dollars, yet the government claims that it's about improving education. Why should parents believe what the Federation's saying over the government?
Well, it's quite clear it is about budgets. It's about dollars. In fact, the fact sheet they released on March the 11th, the first dot point was school budgets. You had to get to page 4 of the 5-page document before the words student learning outcomes were even mentioned. But the real evidence for that is that the Treasurer, back in September, announced that local decisions and local schools was all about economic and fiscal reform. Economic, fiscal reform. And he announced that in the budget papers, at the same time as announcing $10 billion have to be removed from the public sector budget, and the loss of 5,000 positions that would go with that. So quite clearly the Treasurer situated local schools, local decisions as an economic reform, not educational reform.
Is there any evidence that this process has already begun?
We saw the first impact of local schools, local decisions last week. Last Wednesday, the department announced the axing of 200 positions, mainly teaching positions that currently support schools in head office. Teachers working in the curriculum directorate, for instance, that's been gutted. In professional development for teachers, that's been gutted. Equity programs as well. 200 positions is a big hit.
The government describes its job cuts as getting rid of backroom bureaucrats or people who aren't on the front line of service delivery. What is it that these teachers in head office type positions really do?
Look, that notion of backroom jobs is really an insulting term. These are teachers doing real work, supporting our teachers in schools right across New South Wales, and we're a big system. 770,000 students, 2,200 schools, and they need support, and these teachers have been providing it for many years. It's one of the features of the public education system that's made it so strong. But I'll give you an example of how severe the cuts actually are. We now have, as of last week, only one teacher in state office responsible for English for K to 6. Only one teacher responsible for English from 7 to 12. So the compulsory subject that goes right through to year 12, kindergarten to year 12, a critical area, key learning area, now only has 2 people for 770,000 students across 2,200 sites, and at a time where we're introducing a national curriculum in every key learning area, and certainly English is one of those areas. So that's just an example of how severe these cuts have been.
Working at a difficult to staff school with a high percent of Aboriginal students, my concerns with local schools, local decisions is the lack of consultation and knowledge amongst the community members, as well as the instability that it may cause with teaching staff in front of our students.
Maury, you're a teacher of many years' experience, including being a school principal. What sort of position might this place you in as a principal when you're having to decide about how to meet your budget?
34 years a teacher.
And included in that 10 years as a principal?
It's the last 10 years as a principal.
Okay, can you think back when you were a young teacher teaching English, say your first appointment, what would happen if in your faculty area you needed curriculum support for say, developing a new English curriculum? The government decides to introduce a new curriculum. How would you get support in the school to be able to do that?
Oh, look, in those days there was high levels of support for teachers. There were real practitioners who would be seconded to work with English faculties in schools, share resources, help develop programs, assessment strategies. And it was a time when the department really took seriously the support for teachers in schools. Sadly now we're reaching an era where we believe the department has been gutted effectively by Treasury to have the funding pulled out, where they just cannot simply afford to have those support personnel anymore. Those teachers who provided that support for schools, they've just been removed from those positions.
I'm in a rural setting. I've got a big class as it is, and it worries me that I won't be able to cater for those kids if there's no limit on the class sizes.
All of this happened 15 years ago or more in Victoria. What was the effect there?
Well, Victoria, prior to this agenda being rolled out then, Victoria had a pretty proud history of being one of the highest per capita levels of funding from state government to Victorian schools, public schools. Now, for many years, Victoria has been at the bottom. Of all the states, it spends the smallest amount of money per capita on students in public schools. And we fear that's exactly the scenario that Treasury wants to develop in New South Wales. What does that mean in real terms? Well, let's translate it into teachers, for instance. In Victoria, they have 7,500 fewer full-time permanent teachers than New South Wales. 1,500 fewer permanent full-time supports personnel in schools.
And it's a system of a similar size to New South Wales?
Very similar size to New South Wales. We have more complexities in terms of rural and remote, but we've got two large population centres, Sydney, Melbourne, similar sized populations. So that's a very, very dramatic difference.
I'm an English head teacher in a rural high school of about 340 students. I'm concerned about the proposal and the effect that it's going to have on rural schools and their communities, considering the fact that head teachers may not even exist under this current proposal.
That's the situation in secondary schools. What would the effect be in a primary school where there's not particular individual subject areas?
Well, it could mean the loss of positions like teacher librarians, counselling hours. It could mean the loss of assistant principals. If the staffing needs of the school are greater than the level of funding that's provided in the staffing budget, then the principal's placed in an awful, invidious position of having to make a cut at that local level. So it won't be the Minister for Education who'll have to front the community and say why they're cutting teacher librarian, why the school's lost an assistant principal. It'll be the principal sitting around a table with the finance committee saying, well, we just can't simply afford to keep the same staffing levels as we did last year. We're either going to have to increase class sizes or we're going to have to lose some positions.
I'm concerned that in the future there won't be regulated pupil-teacher ratios. Therefore, I'm worried that I'll have to raise class sizes kindergarten, year 1 and year 2 to meet staff costs, and I won't have an adequate budget to pay teachers.
Put simply, local schools, local decisions puts money ahead of students' needs. In an effort to balance a budget, a principal may be forced to hire fewer teachers. This could lead to fewer subject choices, it could lead to larger class sizes, and ultimately the students will lose out. Programs could be cut. Local schools, local decisions gives no guarantees of any of the gains that teachers have fought for over the years, and the students are ultimately the losers.
So if you're a student, say, in year 7 and you've got a particular talent for music and you might decide that you'd like to study music as part of an elective subject through year 8 and all the way through to year 12, a decision could be made at the school level that there won't be a music teacher.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure in the secondary area on trying to keep a very broad curriculum. It's already an area it's tight, and principals manage to do it. One of the imperatives for developing a timetable, of course, is to make sure, because you've got a broad enrolment, that you've got enough subjects, a breadth and depth of subjects that cater for every student needs.
If principals are forced to cut teacher and head teacher positions, then how can we provide students with the subjects that they want and need?
One of the other issues that Federation keeps emphasising is this idea that you could replace permanent teachers with casual teachers. Now we know that casual teachers perform a very important role in schools, filling in where people are on leave, sick, maternity leave or whatever. What could be the impact, however, on students if a principal can decide that a permanent teacher who retires could be replaced, say, by a casual?
I think this is one of the most dangerous of all the propositions that local schools, local decisions is about. This is one of the most dangerous. This is effectively the casualisation of the teaching workforce. And we've seen in Victoria now very, very high levels of temporary teachers, casual teachers working in schools. We see in Western Australia now 47% of the so-called autonomous schools, 47% are now teachers on short-term engagements. No continuity of programs, no continuity of teaching in the schools, temporary teachers, casual teachers who can go to other schools at a moment's notice. They can seek blocks in other schools. So you've lost all that continuity. And but more importantly, I think for parents, they must realise why the government would want schools to be able to do that, because it doesn't make sense when you look at it. Why would you replace a permanent position with a temporary position? Well, if you've got a staffing budget and you've got a principal saying, well, look, the number of teachers I've got is too expensive. I can't afford to have the number of permanent positions I currently have because I'm going to blow the budget. Well, then you can see why the government's saying, well, in that case, don't worry about replacing that permanent position with another permanent position. That's too costly. Just get a teacher in on a casual basis or a short-term engagement and keep them employed until the time that you blow the budget, and then you can remove them from the school and perhaps share the students out into other classes. So that notion of allowing schools to fill a permanent position with a temporary position, that's a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's not about flexibility. That's about saying to a principal, we know that at some point you're going to sit down and add up the figures and realise you can't afford to have all the staff you currently have, and you're going to have to let some people go.
My biggest concern about the local schools, local decision making scheme is that it's not about partnerships. It's about shifting blame and costs into and onto schools and the very people that public schools should be about.
The greatest concern is that we believe that it's about Treasury putting pressure on the department to reduce the number of people they employ in schools, the number of teachers and support personnel. And how are they going to do that? Well, at the moment, staffing levels in schools, number of teachers, for instance, the number of specialist teachers and executive staff are guaranteed by the government. There's a staffing formula. That staffing formula is based on class sizes formula. What they're saying is that's all going to go. And instead of having formally determined the number of teachers in schools, that is the number of students and the number of subjects that are offered in a school, they're going to throw that out and instead just provide a bucket of money to a principal, a staffing budget, and say to a principal, you now have to employ everyone from that budget, a budget that Treasury has determined and Treasury will control. Now we know wherever they've done that in other states and in other countries, what happens is the budget shrinks. And principals then are forced to have to then make cuts to teaching and non-teaching positions in our schools. It guarantees the staffing levels have gone, and that's how Treasury saves money. That's our greatest concern.